Linneball from John Linneball Tutoring, and we are going to discuss some ideas about the SAT essay. The SAT is coming up on October 1st, which is a little more than a day from the time that I'm recording this. So the first thing you want to talk about in the SAT essay is logos, the appeal to logic. Deductive logic is the idea of going from general to specific, so things tend to fall when you drop them. That means if I let go of my pen with my hand in the air, the pen will drop and hit the floor. Inductive logic. Everything I seem to drop falls down to the ground. That must be because of gravity. So that's going from the specific to the general. And inductive logic can be attacked on the grounds that the plural of anecdotes are basically stories, is not data. So just because it happens in all these cases doesn't mean it happens in every case. You have logical flaws, such as the straw man, that seems to be very popular in online arguments, which is making a fake or distorted version of the opponent's argument, then attacking that. For example, if you say, gee, we should give more aid to the poor. Oh, sure, so you're saying we should give all our money to people who refuse to work. That's a great idea. That's a straw man argument, saying, no, I'm just thinking some people who are having trouble making ends meet could use a little bit of food or some clothing. Charity's a good thing. So there's the difference between that and saying all people's money should be taken and given away to people who have less money. Now that's as opposed to the reductio ad absurdum. I'm sorry if I'm butchering these Latin phrases. I did not take Latin in school. And that shows the ridiculous, absurd result that comes from your opponent's argument if it is assumed to be true. So if somebody actually argued, well, it should be the legal responsibility that everyone is wealthy, should give away all their money until they only have as much as the average person before they started giving money away, you'd say, well, then we would have nobody who had finances to start businesses, to employ people. So that would cause some awful results, as we've seen in some socialist countries and some communist planned economies. That would be a reductio ad absurdum. You could also say, well, it would give nobody any incentive to earn money since you would simply be taking it all away. Logical flaws. Well, appeals to emotion can be the weakest. By definition, emotion is not necessarily logical. So if someone's saying, gee, that'd be really horrible if you do that, oh my gosh, you're just a monster, you might want to say, well, okay, I understand that emotionally it makes you feel bad, but logically show me how that's wrong. Um, Pathos, or pathos, depending on how it's pronounced, is the appeal to emotion. So again, that goes to the special case, such as there's an argumentum as ad misericordiam, that's an appeal to pity or guilt. So, for example, how can you be against foreign aid and expanded welfare benefits when children are starving, you sick, self-centered loser? Now, that's not the only kind of appeal to emotion, but that is a special case. So you're saying, well, okay, don't you feel bad for these people? Don't you want to help them? Don't you feel guilty? You've had all these advantages in life, and how can you not help people out? Now, there's also the argumentum ad populum, or the argument to popularity, also known as being in middle school or high school. Ba-dum-bum. Everyone else agrees with me, why don't you? All the cool kids are doing it. So that is an argument to popularity. Well, there was an album called The 50 Million Elvis Fans Can't Be Wrong. Well, yes, they can. You can have 50 million wrong people. There's no limit on wrongness. The argument to authority, or argumentum ad varacundiam, I don't know if I pronounced that right, or ex cathedra, I don't know how to pronounce that either, which is basically literally means from the chair. This is from the Catholic Church, where people would sit in a fancy chair or a throne and issue their pronouncements. So arguments to authority might be right, but they can be wrong. Let's take this example here. Well, Sir Isaac Newton agreed with my viewpoint, but I'm sure you're smarter than the man who invented physics and calculus. You may have a point if the subject is physics or calculus, but not theology. Isaac Newton was a Christian. That doesn't necessarily mean that Christianity is better than other religions, because Isaac Newton was not an expert on theology. He didn't have any knowledge of the supernatural any more than anyone else does, so how would he know? On the internet, you see that a lot in things that are called glurge. They're usually little inspirational stories, and when they need a stock character of a very smart person that people wouldn't argue with, they pick Albert Einstein. So then if you argue with them, you're saying, oh, so you're smarter than Albert Einstein, are you? Well, this isn't physics, so I could very well be smarter than Albert Einstein about this topic. Then there's the argumentum ad hominem, which is literally the argument to the man. If it's against a woman, technically it's an ad feminem argument. So that would be along the lines of, I'd expect that argument from someone like you. The idea is you're attacking a personal characteristic of the person, perhaps that they are a man or a woman, or their nationality, or their religion, or things that are protected characteristics under anti-discrimination laws in the US and many other countries. So not too cool to make them, and it's a logical fallacy because usually membership in any particular group doesn't automatically negate your argument. Logic and biology, politics, none of those things are the same thing. So you might also want to look for uniting or separating language. Something like, we cool people all do this thing, but those dorks over there do that other thing. So when someone starts saying we and things like that, and you say, well, what do you mean we? I'm not sure I agree with you. Why are you automatically lumping me in with you? Ethos or ethos, the appeal to morality. That's basically, good people don't do that. If you were a good person, you wouldn't do that. You would agree with me. You wouldn't disagree with me. So you can see the uniting and separating language above. People like us think this way and do that, but people like that do that other thing we don't like. So the idea is if you want to be part of the group, you have to act like us. Again, that's kind of middle school, high school level logic. So, or lack of logic, it's a logical fallacy. So you can analogize things you like to things universally believed to be good. So, protecting children, perhaps censorship. Well, I don't like that TV show. I think it's smutty. I think it's too violent. And gosh darn it, I don't think I'd want children watching it. Would you want your children watching that? So if you want to protect children, you should let me decide what gets to be on television and what doesn't. Otherwise, you're a bad person. And you can take things you don't like and compare them to things universally believed to be bad. Same argument. You know who else liked censorship? Hitler, Pol Pot, Stalin. Oh, I see. And you say it's for protecting the children. I wonder where we've heard that before. Oh, everyone who's ever wanted censorship, like Stalin and Pol Pot and Hitler. So again, you can compare anything to Stalin's purges, Pol Pot's or China's Cultural Revolution, ethnic cleansing in Bosnia. This can easily be abused, as I just have, and that's why things such as Godwin's Law have come up on the internet. And that's a joke of a law that says the first person to refer to Hitler's, Nazis, or the Holocaust in an argument automatically loses. It's a joke, but there's a point to it. It's both extreme and cliched. For example, you could abuse the whole Hitler or Holocaust thing by saying, you love your dog, do you? You know who else loved his dog? Hitler! So, what's that mean? I mean, that takes away from the argument. Stories. Those are kinds of evidence. We're talking about evidence here. So you have stories such as personal anecdotes. That can be attacked on the grounds, well, the plural of anecdote is not data. Well, that's great that that one thing happened once, but that was an outlier, a very unusual occurrence, and you're just taking some kind of really unusual occurrence and pretending that that is the rule rather than the exception. Surveys, studies, statistical evidence, scientific data, data from scientific studies, experimental data from scientific studies. Those are all things that are good factual bases for an argument if they are used correctly. You might want to look at the passages in the SAT passage and say, well, is this actually what's going on here? Is this being used correctly is what I'm trying to say. Historical examples. Well, commonly known history. If you know the Revolutionary War, the Roman Empire, Alexander the Great, the history of the Native Americans, Asian history, Chinese history, Indian history. Those are all things you can get examples from. Recent news. News is the first draft of history. Those are all examples you can use in essays. Those are all things that might come up in the passages that you have to read. So, does the author cite the history correctly? Is it apt? Is it useful in proving the point? It probably will be, so point it out. But if it's not, you can get some extra bonus points, as I'll talk about in a few minutes. Appeals to authority. Okay, as I said earlier, an appeal to authority might be a statement from a relevant, important figure in the field being discussed. So Albert Einstein, physics, great. Albert Einstein, botany, well, maybe not. Could be biographical details of these famous people to prove or discredit a point of view. For example, Albert Einstein and Thomas Edison were both believed to be slow learners, and this anecdote or those anecdotes can be used to show that children who are believed to be stupid may grow up to be very intelligent. So here are the instructions from an essay question, edited to remove the name of that particular passage's author. So before the passage, you'll see something like this. As you read the passage below, consider how the author uses evidence such as facts or examples to support claims, reasoning to develop ideas and to connect claims and evidence, stylistic or persuasive elements such as word choice or appeals to emotion to add power to the ideas expressed. So after the passage, we're going to say something like, write an essay in which you explain how the author builds an argument to persuade his or her audience that the author's point, so whatever the author's point is. In your essay, analyze how the author uses one or more of the features in the directions that precede the passage, or features of your own choice to strengthen the logic and persuasiveness of his or her argument. Be sure that your analysis focuses on the most relevant features of the passage. Your essay should not explain whether you agree with the author's claims, but rather how the author builds an argument to persuade his or her audience. So you definitely want to make sure you understand these instructions. If you've read them and understand them ahead of time, you don't have to spend time reading them and thinking about them when you only have 50 minutes to read the passage and write the essay. So the author's name and main point will be where I've put in the author and the author's point in brackets in case you can't figure that one out. Now, what they're saying here is you're not supposed to criticize, attack, or argue against the piece you're analyzing. The instructions do tell you not to give your own opinion, and at least one review book that I use tells the reader not to waste time looking for errors in the argument. I'm a little bit of a contrarian on this point in that my point of view is that while obviously, yes, you should spend most of your time analyzing the argument presented to you and describing the techniques and how they're put together to make the complete package of this argument, you can, however, gain a few extra points by showing any obvious counter-argument that is not addressed, any flaw in the logic, any problem you see with the examples, or the language used in the essay, especially if you are able to articulate, that means state clearly, the flaw or flaws. You'll demonstrate a deep understanding of the logic, examples, and language, especially if you're able to demonstrate clearly and simply how it could have been eliminated. So you want to say something like, this essay could have been improved by using a more apt example than this, or this essay cites to a survey from 1978, which, golly gee, is about 28 years ago. Certainly there must have been something, actually 38 years ago. Certainly there must be some more recent survey evidence or scientific evidence on the topic. And if you can say how that could have been eliminated, that is a great way to establish that there is a problem and that not only do you understand it well enough to analyze it, you understand it well enough to briefly say there is a flaw and this should be fixed. And the reason is, let's face it, it's easier to write nice things about a piece of writing than to write negative things. I mean, for example, you could say, any author in her persuasive essay, Why Cheese Puffs Are the Perfect Food, use logic, personal anecdotes, survey evidence, and quotations from relevant authorities to establish her case while using humor and apt advanced vocabulary that is still very approachable and understandable to establish her point that humble cheese puffs, long believed to be a demonic food plaguing the denizens of convenience stores and those with no cooking skills, are in fact a nutritionally complete, portable, and shelf-stable food. That's fine, especially if the grader is somebody who's zipping through these, has got to get through them in about a minute a piece. Says, okay, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Okay, great. You advertised, or not you advertised, you understand the things that you were supposed to look for and you found them. Congratulations, here's your grade. It's harder to say the author of Why Cheese Puffs Are the Perfect Food writes a ridiculous essay that insults the intelligence of the reader while making logically inconsistent arguments using spurious quotations from authorities in fields other than nutrition, medicine, human development, biology, or agriculture, because you're much more likely to have to actually support your criticism. If you take what appears to be a controversial stand on something, you are going to have to back it up or say, well, this is an argument. At least it's going to have to be a pretty convincing argument. If you just make vague positive claims, the grader can just agree with you, say, oh, yes, it's great writing, and notice that you notice the literary and argumentative devices such as advanced vocabulary and logic used in the passage, and the grader won't have to pay much attention to your actual writing. In other words, if you write something unusual or controversial, as I just said, you can gain points, but you can also lose points if you haven't backed your claims, or if you have spelling or grammatical errors the grader might have otherwise overlooked. Believe me, I know from grading enough of these from working for SAT prep places. The longer I look at it, the more likely I am to find, oh, there's a spelling error I didn't notice. Oh, how about that? There's a punctuation problem. That choice of words was a little unusual and I don't like it very much. Those are all things that you have to consider when you decide to attack the source. But if you can do it well, you can actually gain points, I believe, because it definitely shows a deep understanding of the logic and of the devices used. So, in any event, your introduction should be like one of the paragraphs listed above, most likely the first one where you just say nice things about it, and list all the devices that the author uses, and name the author if the author's name is listed, and give the title if the title is listed. But you shouldn't write the introduction until you've already written at least one body paragraph describing the use of each device. So if you want to talk about logic, write one paragraph about logic. Then write another paragraph about the statistics or other evidence that's used to support the logic. Then write about the humor, the alliteration, the similes, the metaphors, the arguments to emotion, the advanced vocabulary. So you're going to want to write paragraphs about all those. Then when you're done with that, then go back and write the introduction saying, the author, any author, in blah, 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 uses these devices, list all the devices that the author uses. And then after that, write the conclusion, because the conclusion can be 1 or 2 sentences and you can write it in a hurry at the end, just as you've probably done all through high school. So, why are you asking that I should do this? Why you ask? Well, it's simple. If you're like me, you're going to think of things as you're writing, especially when you have to write this whole thing 50 minutes after you start reading the passage. That means you're writing on the fly. So you've already started to write when you're starting to notice other things or things start to click in your brain and you're like, oh, wow, okay, this goes with this. So if you digress, that means just stray away from the points you've already made in the introduction, you lose points because they'll say, well, this isn't consistent with what you told me you were going to tell me. This is something else. And that can't happen if you write the introduction after you wrote the body paragraphs, because then you'll know exactly what's in the body paragraphs because you've already written them. And then, of course, you can write the conclusion. Now, at the end here, here's a few miscellaneous things that came into my mind. You can praise or condemn a writing technique using kind of the same thing, or techniques that do the same thing just by the words and phrases you use to describe them, kind of like words and phrases used to describe anything. For example, old jokes, not too positive. Classic witticisms. Wow, that's an old joke you like. Old sayings, trite cliches. Ugh, God, not again. Timeless wisdom, old adages, that sounds much nicer than trite cliches like, oh God. If I hear someone ask me, hey John, are you working hard or hardly working? Oh God, no. Oh, it's timeless wisdom. It's a classic witticism. Well, actually, that's more of a classic witticism. It's an old joke that people insist on using. Language a person would expect to hear from a grade schooler, like certain politicians who appeal to the lowest common denominator. You can make that sound good by saying it's simple, direct, approachable language. And if we go to the other extreme of the language scale, if you have overblown, pompous, pretentious language that alienates the reader or the listener, The person has to listen, get out their iPhone, and start looking up things on thesaurus.com. Like, what did they say? What did they say? What do they mean? You can call that apt advanced vocabulary that shows a command of both the English language and the topic at hand. So those are things that you can think about. Hopefully you'll do really well on the SAT essay if you're taking it, well, whenever you're taking it, if you're taking it this coming Saturday, if you're taking it in the future. I hope that this helped. And if you need to get in touch with me, you can always reach me at area code 415-986-7355. And you can always find me online at johnlinneball.com. And in fact, I will type that out for you right now. Oops. .com. All right. Have a good day.